As we've been reporting, rioters stormed the U.S. Capitol building on Wednesday just as Congress began counting Electoral College votes. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle have publicly condemned the violence as a threat to democracy. New York Democratic Congressman Mondaire Jones was on the House floor when the protests started, and rioters streamed in. He joins me now. Congressman Jones, you were forced to evacuate. Can you describe to us what that was like?
It was a very harrowing experience to be on the House floor and what was supposed to be and historically has been a routine certification exercise. You know, Congress routinely certifies the results of presidential elections until now, until Donald Trump and his co-conspirators in the United States Congress on the Republican side manufactured a myth of voter fraud and incited violence, incited an insurrection like what we saw today. And so I feared for my life in the way that I'm sure many of the approximately 200 other people on the House floor and in the gallery overlooking the House floor today.
So rioters got into the House and Senate floors. How do you think they were able to get so far without being stopped by law enforcement?
It's a great question. And it's one that Congress absolutely has to look into because it cannot be said that there was not enough notice about what was going to happen today. The kind of numbers that we saw in terms of protesters and domestic terrorists who descended upon the Capitol. There was ample notice and ample time to prepare. And I've got to tell you, I, along with many other people, I think, who have seen images on various social media platforms of law enforcement agents taking selfies with these domestic terrorists who had breached security and already successfully stormed the Capitol, along with folks, again, law enforcement agents who have been videotaped allowing mobs to enter past gates. That is very distressing, and it's something that needs to be investigated. And anyone who is responsible for these various security breaches today must be held accountable. Because, as I mentioned, I was on the House floor with approximately 200 other members of Congress, including the Speaker, and there was a moment, a very frenetic moment, when there was a loud banging on the door, and that was the mob that had found its way to the House floor. And there were only a handful of law enforcement agents available to protect us. And so something like that should never have been allowed to happen, and Congress has to investigate that. But just as important is the fact that Republican members of Congress must take responsibility for their significant role in legitimizing these fears and these grievances that Donald Trump has been propagating, legitimizing this idea that somehow there was voter fraud, which has led to these mobsters coming to the Capitol and attempting to do bodily harm to all of us.
We did see images of many Capitol Hill police and, Capitol Police and Metro PD working to try and keep that angry mob from breaching those barricades. But Congresswoman Cori Bush tweeted that she plans to introduce legislation calling for the expulsion of members of Congress who, quote, helped incite this domestic terror attack through their attempts to overturn the election. Do you think that some of your Republican colleagues should be removed from Congress for their role in this?
I do. Absolutely. These people who have been objecting to the certification of the presidential election, again, without a basis, because, of course, they can never actually point to any fraud that happened. They're doing this to lay the groundwork for 10 more years of voter suppression on the basis that somehow the 2020 election was taken from them. These are people who are behaving unlawfully, unethically, and in a way that is unbecoming of the United States House of Representatives. And there have to be consequences for this kind of behavior. Otherwise, you're just going to embolden people to continue to behave in the way that they've been. And so I decided to co-sponsor that resolution to expel these House members. And am looking forward to seeing my colleagues join me on the House side.
Representative Ilhan Omar, in the meantime, says that she is drafting up articles of impeachment against President Trump, with only about 2 weeks left of his presidency. What do you think might be achieved through impeaching the president at this point? Do you support her efforts, and do you think that it is likely to go anywhere?
I support the impeachment of this president, again. And that's critical because there are other Donald Trumps in the Republican Party waiting to run for president in 2024 or run for Congress. They need to understand that when you behave unlawfully, when you behave criminally, when you incite an insurrection, when you encourage people to attack the legislative branch of the federal government, you will be met with consequences. Again, if we don't do anything at all, if Congress completely abdicates its responsibility to be a check on the executive branch of government, then we really abdicate that responsibility, and we do not do a service to the American people, which is what we have been elected to do. We have to make sure that we carry out democracy. That's why I'm so looking forward to voting to certify these results. But there has to be a reckoning after today is over.
Congressman Jones, speaking with another one of my guests, he, as a black man, was saying that watching what transpired at the Capitol had a different lens for him. During Black Lives Matter protests over the summer, police officers across the nation often used physical force against protesters, including tear gas and rubber bullets. How does that compare with what we've seen today? And I wanted to give you an opportunity as well to talk about how you perhaps have a different perspective than some of the other people who, because of different lived experiences, may have seen today's events transpire.
Well, after I was, along with other members of Congress, successfully evacuated from the House floor to another secure location, I began having conversations with people in the room, my colleagues, and there was a theme, there was a trend. Members of the CBC, the Congressional Black Caucus, were letting it be known that if these protesters were black, there is no way in the world that they would have been allowed to storm the Capitol. They would have been gunned down hundreds of yards away from the Capitol structure. Look at how Black Lives Matter protesters for racial justice were treated in terms of the relative level of security at the Capitol and all across this country. People have died for far less than attempting to take the lives of federal lawmakers today. And indeed, one person tragically was murdered. There have to be consequences. There has to be a full investigation of this, and there must be accountability.
Representative Jones, I spoke with one of your colleagues on the Republican side who said that there does need to be a bit of soul searching in the Republican Party. What do you think the role is for bipartisanship after such ugliness and such vitriol spewed against people who are not of the same party? What path forward do you see in terms of being able to work with Republicans?
I am someone who prides himself on his ability and willingness to work with Republican colleagues. And in fact, I've already started that process. I'm really proud to have already had talks with Republicans who want to restore the SALT deduction, for example, which impacts New Yorkers everywhere. But here's the thing. You cannot in good faith talk about bipartisanship when a large swath of the Republican conference is inciting violence against you. It's not the foundation that is necessary for real bipartisanship. There's rampant misinformation, aspersions, embrace in many corners of the party of white supremacy, like the white supremacists you saw today storming the Capitol. And so it makes it really difficult. And I'm hopeful that with a new president of the United States and a new United States Senate after last night's runoff, that we'll be able to do the work of the American people and really deliver.
Representative Mondaire Jones, thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you.